I would just like to introduce you to what? Oh, I thought you were laughing about following the children's band, and I really expected half the congregation to leave when they said that. No, you cannot leave. It is a cross in the side of a Sudanese church, and a kid is looking through it. Can't see it very well. It's the way pictures are. You got lots of windows in this place. We need a new church that has no windows. Yeah. Anyway, I would love to introduce you to James Ellis. He's going to take the rest of this time. I told him that Chew's record was 12:30, so get ready. Come on up, James.
All right, so I'm going to find my fancy little clicker. This is very fancy. All right, I am way ahead of that. Yeah, if you could. 49? No? No, after that. Keep going. Nope, it's further. Yeah. It's further. Keep going. We're getting closer, but it's not quite there yet. There's a video. That's the one it's at. I think you got 3 or 4 more. Nope, past that. Keep going. Right there. Okay, great. So, I guess they're gone again. I was going to introduce my family, but my other 2 kids left. I really do have 3, I promise you. But we've got my oldest one here, Caleb, who's 10, and then my wife, Lindsay. We've married about 12 years this June. It's New Year's. Anyway, so this is our missionary video. It's about 5 minutes long, so I'm going to start with that, and then I'll talk.
Umemeza abantu abadala kangaka webantwana kanisaleleli ngani umbiko wokuzalwa kwenkosi uJesu nazo inkanyezi enhle nazo
South Sudan, a nation about the size of Texas with a population of about 10 million. It is located near the equator, having a climate that is tropical, known by the locals as the season of mud and the season of dust. It is bordered by 6 other nations: Kenya, Uganda, the Congo, CAR, Sudan, and Ethiopia. The Sudanese have recently come out of a 50-year civil war with Islamic Sudan, costing over 2 million civilian lives. Missionaries were kicked out of Sudan in 1964, and persecution soon became the way of life. Over 4 million people were displaced during the civil war. The words of Pastor Kenneth Barangwa emulate the situation well. For the cause of our faith in Christ, we have been persecuted. Many have been killed, tortured, and even starved to death. Despite all these atrocities, we as Christians do stand firm in our faith, knowing that Jesus Christ honors faithfulness and is fighting with us. I am therefore appealing to the outside world to pay attention to what is going on in Sudan. Christian brothers and sisters, please do come and rescue your brothers and sisters from the mouth of the lion before we are finished.
Peace did finally come in 2005 under the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, and on July 9, 2011, South Sudan received independence, becoming the 193rd nation in the world. Conditions of upheaval, war-related suffering, and the threat of violent death have nudged the Sudanese increasingly towards Christianity as a source of salvation. Paradoxically, the religious persecution of non-Muslims had the effect of promoting Christianity.
As hardships in South Sudan multiplied, the largest tribe in South Sudan, known as the Dinka, identify their trials with the biblical prophecy in Isaiah chapter 18, verses 6 through 7. They will be left together for the mountain birds of prey and for the beasts of the earth. The birds of prey will summer on them, and the beasts of the earth will winter on them. In that time, a present will be brought to the Lord of hosts from a people tall and smooth of skin, and from a people terrible from their beginning onward, a nation powerful and treading down, whose land the rivers divide, and the place of the name of the Lord of hosts to Mount Zion. In this verse, the Dinka see their tragedy and their ultimate glory, making the gospel directly relevant to their plight. Every major cult is already present in South Sudan, deceiving many who desire to know the Almighty God, who gave them their independence. There is only a matter of time before this window of receptiveness closes, as it has in so many other fields throughout the 20th century. James and Lindsay Ellis, missionaries to South Sudan. We have been married for over 10 years, and we have 3 children, Caleb, Joshua, and Elijah. Our family is excited for the ministry the Lord has for us in South Sudan. We were called to full-time ministry in 2010 and enrolled in Cornerstone Bible Institute. We wanted to have a firm foundation in the Word and strengthen our walk with the Lord. Our goal is to move into the capital city of Juba, a sprawling third-world metropolis said to be occupied by over 1 million souls. This is a strategic point to share the gospel, as the population in Juba is multicultural, having representatives from all of the major tribes throughout the entire country. Our heart's desire is to plant independent, Bible-believing churches to propagate the gospel further, to disciple new believers and train local pastors for ministry, to reach out further into the country, as seen in 2 Timothy 2:2. And the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men, who shall be able to teach others also. The church is the most powerful functional indigenous institution in South Sudan. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of the shadow of death, upon them a light is shining. Isaiah 9:2. God has prepared the field. They are ready. Are we?
So that gives you an introduction, those of you who weren't there this morning and wanted to sleep in and skip Sunday school. It tells you a little bit about the history that I spent a lot of time talking about this morning. So let me see what the next slide is here. This is a brand new slideshow I just put together for you guys. Okay, this is not my family. It's just a picture of them. But you can see the 3 kids. I really do have 3. Caleb over here, and then that's Joshua, and that's Elijah, 10, 8, and 5. Okay, so I just got back. I landed on Wednesday in the evening there in Kansas City, and in case you were wondering, yes, it is hot. About 117 on that day. Some a little more, some a little less. It got down to 80 one night, and I had to get a blanket. This was my mode of transportation. It's late 80s, early 90s Honda, and I drove that thing all throughout the bush. Didn't run over any snakes, but I came very close to running over a black mamba. I was going along the road, and I had traveled this way many, many times throughout the course of the week. And there were some guys over here on the right. They were making bricks. And as I was approaching, they started getting really excited and pointing down to the ground. And then they just throw their shovels, and they run across the street in front of me. And right on their tail was a big black snake that was about the length the road was wide, and I barely missed it on the motorbike, which I'm glad, because I had nightmares about running that thing over and it whipping around and biting me on the leg. So that was the closest I came to a mamba. I can't really tell. Okay, where I was staying, I talked about that this morning a little bit. It's down in a district called Kajukeje. It's right on the border with Uganda. I was probably about 10 miles from the border with Uganda there. They speak the Bari language, which is sort of a tribal spin on Swahili. It's very similar to it. I stayed with the missionary. He let me. They actually left, him and his family, and they gave me the keys to his house and his motorcycle for a week. And this is the trail as you're leaving the house to the church that he planted, Mere Independent Baptist Church. It's very, very large, and hardly anybody goes there, though. It's a brand new church. Okay, as I was traveling around, I spent my first day going through Pastor Joshua Pyle, the missionary there, and visiting some of the people in his church, and kind of putting out fires. This is a widow who hadn't been coming to church, and so I was asked to go to her hut and find out what was going on. So I sit down and I start talking to her, and I'm as green as can be. I'm not a missionary. I'm on deputation, and I get to play missionary for a week. And so this was a very intimidating situation. And what do you say? Somebody you don't know, they don't know you, and because you're a Mazunga, a white guy, they automatically think that you know everything. So I go there and I start talking to her, and she's telling me her story. In the 80s, whenever the North Sudan, they almost won the war. They pushed the SPLA, the Sudanese People Liberation Army, all the way down to this little corner in Kajukeji. That was the last holdout. Everybody else had been pushed all the way into Uganda. And they firebombed this entire village. And so what they had done, the locals, they dug these like spider holes, and whenever they would hear the airplanes coming, they would hide. Well, one of the times, her family got a direct hit. And she had 4 kids, and all of them except for one died, and her husband died. It was just her and the one kid that was in the hole with her, and everybody else had their own holes. And so she remarried and had 3 more kids, and then that husband just died of malaria just like a year or 2 before. And her kids had been going to church, but she hadn't. So I asked, are you born again? Are you a Christian? And she said, well, yes. And so I took her to a few verses, talk about how you're supposed to don't neglect the gathering of the saints and things like that we normally go through, and my heart just really poured out for her. It was incredible, but she was so excited that I took the time to come by and talk to her. She made an oath that she would go to church from now on, and that following Wednesday I did a service, and she was there. And then as I was leaving, I was getting a ride on a motorcycle, and we passed by her hut. She comes running out and stopped the motorcycle. She jumps in front of it, starts waving her arms. She wanted to wash my feet before I left to get on the airplane, but I didn't really feel comfortable with that. I'm an American, and we don't really do that sort of thing. And I was in a hurry, so she didn't. But she made me promise that whenever I come back, I would visit her. Wonderful story. She's a wonderful lady. And she offered me a Coke. In their culture, Coke is very, very important. Coca-Cola, because it's expensive. These are people that don't have any income. They just have a garden, and they live off that garden. And so I wasn't really thirsty, and I turned it down, and I guess I actually offended her by turning it down. So moral of the story, somebody offers you a Coke, say thank you. All right, every morning, this is not photoshopped, by the way. That's just a picture of the sunrise. Every morning, I woke up very, very early, because anybody who's ever done a lot of traveling, you know that after you spend 36 hours in flight and you go 9 hours forward on the time zones, it takes you a while to get acclimated to the new time zone. And on a 9-day trip, you don't really even have time to get acclimated. So my first couple of days, I would go to bed at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon and wake up at like 2 o'clock in the morning. And so I got to see the sunrise every morning. It was quite great. And I would sit and drink my coffee because it was cold. It was like 80, and so I needed coffee to warm me up. And then I would talk to my wife on the phone through Google or Skype. You can pay to call across the internet. And it's like 10 cents a minute, 11 cents a minute or something. So it's not too bad. But that's the picture of the sunrise there. It was right, the time I was there was right as the wet season was transitioning to the dry season. So they were burning all the fields, and it was just a haze always, and it makes for a beautiful picture. This is Voodoo Town, just so you get an idea of kind of what it's like. This is about as far in the bush as you can go. In Africa, it's just not very well developed. This is a very large town for that area. It's the largest in the entire county, actually, and this is the town. I stood on one end and took a picture all the way down Main Street. So VivaCell is the cell phone company there, so they're advertising it. But anyway, so you get an idea of what an African town is like. It's a little bit different, just a little bit. One of the churches I preached at, I talked about it this morning earlier too. I traveled around after my second or third day and just visited out in the bush all these different churches. Some of them were like a 30-minute motorcycle ride out into the bush. And I would visit one in the morning and preach for 2-3 hours, and then they would feed me, and then I would go to one in the afternoon and preach for 2 or 3 hours, and then make my way home. This is one of the ones I preached at. I just love this picture. That's why I put it on there. I don't know their names or anything. I love the smile. She's actually looking up at her pastor, who is getting ready to introduce me. And she just looks almost mesmerized looking up at him. It's very beautiful. And then this was at one of the boreholes there. That's what they call them. We call them a well. They call them a borehole. Well, whatever. Same difference. What the churches oftentimes do, and we as missionaries, it's actually a very good ministry, is you put a borehole on the ground of the church. And everybody within about a kilometer radius comes, and they bring all their buckets, and they get their water, and they just kind of, it becomes sort of a neighborhood hangout. Very good opportunity to sit there and meet people and share the gospel, and it's quite great. But this little boy, he is very, very muscular. I don't know if you can see or not, but he is. And this woman looks angry, but she's not. It was just a bad picture of her. And this woman was, she wanted me to go talk to her husband. Apparently, he quit going to church and started drinking. And I never got a chance to make it over there. I really wish I would have. But she was hoping that I could help. And the poverty there is a pound, a Sudanese pound, is worth about 20 cents. And these people live off of 1 or 2 pounds a week. That's all they live off of. But it's mango season all year. There's mangoes growing constantly. The trees produce 3 crops a year, and all of the trees produce at different times. And some kids, I don't know if I have any pictures of them, so I'll just tell you. They came to me and wanted to know if I wanted to buy some mangoes. And I thought 20 cents for a good fresh mango was a pretty good deal. So I said, all right, I'll give you 5 pounds, give me 5 mangoes. Well, I told somebody else about it thinking I got a good deal, and I got taken to the cleaners. It's a pound for a bucket of mangoes. But anyways, I don't mind paying 20 cents a mango. To me, that's very, very, that's less than, you can't even buy gum for 20 cents here in America anymore. But it's kind of like the Garden of Eden in a lot of ways. There was a garden there at this missionary's house, and their night guard had planted some watermelon just a few days before I got there. And when I got there, nothing had sprouted. After 9 days, when it came time to leave, the vines were about this long and already had blooms on them. So you take a banana and you bury it, and you get a bushel of bananas like 6 months later. Things like that. So things grow very, very well there. The ground is black and fertile. South Sudan, like the video had said, it's about the same size as the state of Texas, and almost the entire country is tillable. It's good black soil, and it's mostly flat. Yet they import almost all of their food. They just, because of the war, they just have no understanding on how to do it. And a lot of Americans have been very well intentioned and said, we can buy a 30 horsepower tractor cheap here, and a little planter and a little tiller, and send it over. And they do, and they go and they show them how to use it. But their culture is not advanced enough for that, and it does not work, just period. It doesn't work. You go back 6 months later, and that tractor is rusting in the field with the tires gone, because it ran out of gas. And they said, well, it's not mine. I don't know. What kind of gas does it take? I forget. And so they just leave it there, and it rusts and breaks down. If you think about it in our culture, we didn't go from living in huts to having tractors in one generation. I mean, it took thousands of years. Hopefully, they are moving at a much faster rate, obviously. But, that's something that we have to keep in mind as missionaries, that there's some things that in their culture they're just not ready for. But we can teach them better techniques and maybe even give them some ideas of some better crops that are more nutritious and not quite as difficult to harvest, things like that. So that's one thing that we can do. Okay, you see this, you can barely see it here, but it's a big giant bowl of rice. This is a girl with a baby on her back. That's how they carry their babies around all day. You'll see a woman with a baby on her back and a 7-gallon bucket of water on her head and 2 7-gallon buckets in each arm, walking, hours. That's just what they do. Funny story. My motorcycle flooded out one morning. And it's a kickstart motorcycle, so what are you going to do, sit there and kick on it all day? So I asked one of the men if they could sit on it and I would push them, and I said, put it in a high gear so it's easier to go. And so we got going downhill, and he popped the clutch, and the tire just locked up and slid on the grass. He didn't weigh enough. The men there are very, very small, about 120 pounds. So I got on it, and I'm 215 pounds. And, so I had them push me, and they couldn't. They couldn't push me. And they said, "Oh, African men, we don't do this sort of thing." And they went and called over a couple of women. And they pushed me, and we got it cranked. Anyways, on New Year's Day, they have this tradition where the pastor preaches all night. Man, I'm already out of time. That is crazy. The pastor preaches all night, and so I get there at 4 p.m. and we do a meal, and then it was 4 a.m. whenever I quit preaching. I was a pretty tired pup, but anyways, so how they served everybody was they had these big flat trays like that, and they just filled it with rice and some bush gravy, and then the kids just sit Indian style around it, and they just kind of dig in, and that's what's going on here. So I'm gonna have to hurry up. What is that? Okay, that's where I cut my foot. I don't know if you can see it very well. That's the day it happened. It still actually wasn't hurting at this point. It's a very small cut, but it was very deep, and I was able to manage. I was there a week with this, and I changed my bandage every day like a good boy. At night, I would clean it with alcohol and peroxide and then let it air out, and as time went on, it started to kind of ooze a little bit, and the bandage would get completely soaked through within just about an hour of putting it on. As I was getting on the plane, Tuesday. Is it this Tuesday? No, that would have been a week ago. Man. As I was getting on the plane, I started to feel kind of feverish. And, I've had a fever a couple of times. I know what it's like. And I thought I had malaria. The thought never occurred to me that it was from an infection in my foot. And so I didn't have malaria medicine. I'm like, well, I guess I just need to, Lord, this is going to be a very miserable trip. Had a 2-hour flight from Kajukeje to Entebbe, a 3-hour layover, and then a 2-hour flight from Entebbe to Nairobi, a 3-hour layover, and then a 10-hour flight from Nairobi to Brussels, Belgium, and then a 2-hour layover, and another 10-hour flight from there to New York, and then a 3-hour layover, and then another 4-hour flight from there to Kansas City. So I was just sitting there thinking, is there any way this could be more miserable? But whatever, it's malaria. I'm going to have a fever. I'm going to be acting weird, but I'll be okay. All right, so I get to Entebbe, and it got a little worse. All right, so then I get on the plane after my layover, and I fly to Nairobi, and it was even worse. By this point, while I was waiting for my plane, my fever was so high, I was having moments where I would actually lose consciousness. And I couldn't hold my head up straight, and I'm like, oh, this is just horrible. There was this little girl noticed I was sick, and she was trying to give me her lollipop. She was like 2 years old, just the cutest little thing. And so I get on the plane, and about 6 hours into it, my fever was even worse, and I was just nodding and just doing this, and I kept passing out, and every time I wake up from passing out, I was really nauseous, and I reached for the barf bag, and the guy next to me in a very, very thick German accent said, "You better not puke on me." And you know, I said something about "leave me alone, buddy" or something like that, and then I passed back out again, and then I'm like, okay, something's got to give, because my foot also swelled up at this point. I was wearing a sandal, and I had rolls going over the top of my sandal. I mean, it was bad, and I still thought it was just from malaria. Yeah, it's a guy thing, I guess. And so I'm like, well, I've got doxycycline. That's what I was taking as a prophylactic for malaria. I'm like, I have no idea what effect this will do, but I took 2 of them. And then I called the nurse, and I asked if she had a thermometer, and she did, and I was running fever 104.2. And then I asked if she could help me get my sandal off, because it was starting to really hurt a lot, and she couldn't, because it was just oozing so bad. And so I took my sandal off, and it hurt so bad I fainted. And I was out for about 2 hours. And then when I woke up, I actually felt a little bit better. My fever was only 102, and I was hungry. And they brought me a little apple pie, and I ate it. And it was so good, I asked for another one, and I drank a whole bunch of water. And then I made it through the rest of the flight. We landed in Belgium, and I had to have help, so they put me in a wheelchair, and they wheeled me to my next gate. And my plane kept getting delayed. And I was sitting there, my fever was starting to get high again, and I was starting to drift out of consciousness again. And it was 5 hours of sitting in that wheelchair. And the last thing I remember thinking, I was laughing to myself. There's a saying that we all know, you know, God will only give you as much as you can bear. And so I was thinking to myself, I'm like, wow, God, you must really think I'm pretty tough, because I can't imagine it getting any worse than this. And just kind of snickering. And then I woke up in a hospital. I passed out, and I don't know if I fell out of the chair or what. I don't know, but somebody noticed me, and they took me to a hospital, and I woke up, and my doctor had a very, very thick Dutch accent there in Belgium, and he was bigger than Arnold Schwarzenegger, and was lecturing me for 30 minutes about how foolish I am for not going to see a doctor. I was trying to explain to him, I was in Sudan. There's no doctors in Sudan. And he's like, no, if you were serious, you could have gotten a doctor. Whatever, you know, what do you do? And then I realized that I didn't have malaria. I had an infection. And so they drew some blood, and they found out that in my blood, I had blood poisoning. And it was a very, very rare and very deadly strain of drug-resistant staph. And so they put me in quarantine and stuck me all by myself in a little corner of the hospital, and the nurses could only come in if they were wearing spacesuits. And I spent 7 days, so I got to spend 7 days in Europe. But you know, I almost died from a little cut. It was only about an inch long. When I was giving pastor's conference there, I was teaching through Romans, and I get to Romans 10, where it talks about beautiful feet. And I really spent a lot of time kind of hammering home to these pastors that, you know, the Great Commission is their responsibility. It's their responsibility to take the gospel to the next tribe over. They can't rely on us. And somebody stood up and told me how beautiful my feet were because I came to them with the gospel. And I'm like, you know, I'm not a missionary. I'm just pretending to be a missionary for a week. You know, sit back down. And I told Lindsay that on the phone the next day. And I guess she got nervous that something bad was going to happen to my foot. She told me afterwards that she did that night. Well, had I gotten on that plane, had my plane to New York not been delayed, I would have lost my foot. Plain and simple. That staph infection, the type that I had, once it gets in your bloodstream, you usually die. And there's no medical reason why I was able to recover in just 3 days from that. And I have no long-term side effects. There's nothing. I just have a little cut on the side of my foot again. So it's really amazing. You know, I got a cool scar and a great story to tell my grandkids. I better advance forward on this, or it's going to take forever. This is one of the churches that I preached at. Lindsay says that whenever she looks at these pictures, it looks like I was cropped in. I'm like, I actually was there. You know, that's not a Photoshop deal. But this was very, very far out in the bush. So we can move forward. This was another church that I preached at. You see this cross in the tree there. What they do whenever they don't have a building is they put benches under mango trees, and then they scrape crosses into the trees so everybody knows that that's a church. And they had just built this new building, and you can kind of see a little bit from the posts and that. And I'm sitting in the building. I just like this picture because it has a kid in it. You can see the cross, and it's from the building. But at this church, I had a very unique experience, and I was videotaping the service, and so I was able to pull this 3-minute clip out or so. A woman comes up behind me while I was preaching, and well, anyways, you can watch the video, you'll figure out what happened.
Where can we go to find out what God wants? Some people will tell us that we find out what God wants It's important for us to understand what God wants.
So she comes up, and she was going like this, and she was very, very serious, and she was bound up. And so I asked my translator, I said, so what has her bound up? And she said that she's possessed by a demon. And that's something that happens a lot. There was one of the churches that I visited, this woman had a broken rib, and she was in a lot of pain. And I said, what happened? She said, well, the night before, some demon-possessed guy came to her little family village and tried to eat them. And so she was running away and tripped on a rock and broke her rib. I talked to another pastor, and he was saying when they first put up the cornerstones, or the corner posts of their church like this one, this demon-possessed guy that everybody knows in the neighborhood, he came up and was just ramming his head against those corner poles there and knocked the building down, and then rolled through the thorn bushes and got up without any blood on him. So this is something that is very, very serious in their culture, and that we'll be facing on a regular basis there. But I thought I would share that video with you. This is another church that I preached at. It's a fairly new building. We'll go forward a little faster. Okay, this was from my trip in May. A little song you guys might recognize, if it'll play. Maybe. Nope, I think we might be froze. Okay, I'll just skip it. Never mind. This was me teaching a Sunday school class. I was trying to share the gospel with these kids, and this was in Juba in May when I was there. And none of the kids spoke English. They only spoke Juba Arabic, which is kind of a Creole version of Arabic. I had an hour to share the gospel with them, and my translator didn't really understand what I was trying to say, so he wasn't able to translate correctly. And at the end of that hour, these kids could not understand what I was talking about. It was so frustrating. It would have been simple for me to say, raise your hand if you want to accept Jesus in your heart. And everybody would raise their hands, and I could have written home 200 kids saved, but I don't feel comfortable with that. So this was a very pivotal moment in my life where I realized the importance of learning their language and their culture to minister to them, because we want to be effective in the ministry, not just go to go. Okay, this is one church that I was visiting that doesn't have a building yet. Let me see if I got the next picture. Yeah, okay. And this is the church after it was all over. This is a woman that was there, and whenever I first came, as soon as I started preaching, she raised her hand, and she had a question. I said, yes, ma'am, what's your question? And she stood up to just say that she was in tears, that she never thought that because they don't have a building, they don't have anything great, that such a big, hairy Mzungu would be able to come and share the gospel with them. So, she was very excited by the fact that I was there. Yeah, they're not really a hairy people. The men can't grow facial hair. They don't have hair on their arms or their legs, the men or the women. There was one boy that was from another tribe on the other side of the country that was there, and he had a little bit of hair on his legs, kind of like a 4 or 5-year-old would. And all the kids would pick on him, and they'd come up behind him and pull the hair on his legs. Yeah, and Lindsay really thinks that picture is photoshopped, by the way, but it's not. I was there. This was a church that I visited where they brought in the regional diocese for the Pentecostals, and then there was a bunch of youth there and some of the pastors that within that organization. I guess a long time ago the Pentecostals had come in and planted a whole bunch of churches and then never taught them the Bible, and they left for whatever reason. And so they came seeking someone to teach them. This guy, he told me that he reads the Bible all the time, but they just open it and start reading, and they have no understanding how to study it. And they were begging me to come and teach them, even if it's just 1 week, just come and teach them how to read their Bible. So I went through and shared the gospel, and none of them were saved. None of them understood even the basic gospel, and they all accepted Christ there. I spent about 4 hours going through the gospel and going through security. This is a man, he's one of their pastors, who I was trying to explain to them that, in God's eyes, and this is difficult even for us to accept in America, in God's eyes, someone who's a murderer isn't different than someone who lies on their taxes. Lying and murdering are both sin, and both will send you to hell. And he could not accept that. And so he was searching the scripture like the Bereans, but he was searching it for a verse to stump me. That was his whole purpose. And he came to Galatians 5, the fruits of the flesh. I was like, okay, that's not too hard. We can explain what that means. And it's showing the contrast, just like in Ephesians 2, and you were and now you are kind of thing. And that Galatians 5 is the same way. But he did eventually accept the gospel. I was able to get him to understand. My youngest child gave me one of the greatest illustrations ever this last summer. We tried to vacation in the first weekend of June down in Missouri, but we got flooded out. We were going to go canoeing, but the river ended up rising in 2 days like 20 feet. And so we had to cross this road that had water rushing across it. It was only like ankle deep to me, maybe a little bit more than ankle, between ankle and somewhere in the shin. But to a 5-year-old, that's deep. And as we were walking across, he said, "So what happens, Dad, if I'm not strong enough to hold on to you and the water takes me away and kills me?" I said, "Well, son, you're not holding on to me. I'm holding on to you, and I'm plenty strong enough for this." And afterwards, after we talked about that, that is a great illustration, and I use that quite a bit whenever I'm teaching about security, because we are not holding on to God. He's holding on to us. If we're depending on our own strength, our own ability to be good, then we're depending on a lie. So I was able to share that with them. This is another demon-possessed woman. You notice the shackles on her feet. She said that she hurts people, and so they bound her up. And she walked. It took about 4 hours to get to church. There's only one loop on those shackles. So I mean, it's very hard to walk with only one loop. Yeah, it was an incredible time. This is another place that I went. These women are sorting through navy beans for the meal. They cook very well with the beans, anyways. But if they try to serve you potash, be careful. Well, yeah. Anyways, this is afterwards. There were too many of us to fit in the shade, so some of us are a little bleached. Yeah. And they served these potatoes. Now, has anybody here ever chewed on a stevia leaf? Okay, or used Truvia in your coffee or something like that. These potatoes, they're white potatoes, and but they taste like they've been sweetened with an artificial sweetener. Nasty. But they love them. I just took a couple of bites and set it down. And I'm full. I lost 10 pounds that week. I really did. And then spending a week laying down in the hospital, I lost another 5. I lost 15 pounds on this trip. So I went to fat camp. Okay, and this is where I did the pastor's conference at, in that building there. Let me go through. Okay, now I'm on my way out. This is the MAF flight. I'm trying to hurry. I really don't want to last till 12:30 and make you guys burn your lunch. Okay, this is in the hospital. This is after the swelling had already gone down. So it looks like my right foot ate another foot. All right, this is from my trip in May. They're singing in English, so hopefully this one will play. I've only had 2 churches tell me what the words are to the song. We'll see how good you guys are. If it'll play. Congratulations. It is a tough crowd. All right, well, I guess it's not going to play. Never mind. And now I think it's froze. It doesn't like the high-def videos. It does well with the other ones, I guess. Okay, this is Edward Dima. He's the head of that organization that I was working with down there, the one that went to Uganda to get training and then came back. Oh, no, you would have had to be in Sunday school to learn that. I'll tell you guys, you need to be at Sunday school. This is Ding, their vice president. He's Nuer, and he is trapped in a UN camp. And he's the one that was telling about how people are starving to death and dying of dehydration there. The organization down in Kajukeje was trying to raise money to send to him so he could at least buy some water, but they lost contact with him. They have no idea where he's at. So it's a very sad story. This is Phil and Charlotte and everybody. That's Lindsay. That's my wife. That's my pastor of the church I go to up in South Dakota and his wife. Okay. I'm going to read to you a quote real quick out of this book. If you had been at Sunday school, you would have heard a lot about the history of South Sudan, and most of it came from this book. So if you're curious, look this up. It's at Barnes & Noble. It's called Sudan, South Sudan, and Darfur, written by a guy named Andrew Nitsois. So he goes over and talks about all the history, and then this is how he closes the book here. As of this writing, and it's in 2012, the 3 most functional indigenous institutions are the Christian churches, the SPLM, and the SPLA. That's like Republican and Democrat. Of these, the most powerful by far are the churches. The values the churches inculcate and the extent to which they use their influence to pursue the public good will determine the South's future. The role of the churches should not be compared to that of the Christian churches in the current-day West, where churches, however influential, make up only one of many institutions that guide the building of a modern civil society. In South Sudan, the churches are the central private institution exercising a powerful influence in the development of the emerging social order. So which churches are going to do that? Is it going to be the Mormons or the Catholics or people like us? Unfortunately, it's people like us that tend to be the last ones. So Lord willing, we'll be there by June. We're raising support right now. We're about 57%. So I think I have one more slide. Okay, so pray for us. Pray that God will open this door and that we will be able to get there. I thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to come and share what the Lord is doing in South Sudan and also in our lives. So you guys are great.